Alright, so how did we do this shot? Well, we started with just some text in the timeline to mark out the basic pace of the scene. And then we shot some simple reference footage just to be able to visualize it in the edit. And then we went out and we shot this footage. We shot at a high shutter speed and at 48 frames per second, which makes it easier to camera track and rotoscope. Alright, so then we bring that shot into After Effects, and our first step is to rotoscope. The green screen isn't very good and is very unevenly lit, but it still helps a lot with rotoscoping. I just used the Roto Brush tool on Kevin, and then I add one refined soft matte effect on his body and one that's just masked to his hair to bring some of that detail back. I then key back in a few small detail areas and add the advanced spill suppressor set to ultra to get rid of any green spill. I can now use the roto we just made as a holdout matte for 3D tracking, so the tracker only looks at the background without getting distracted. And we got a pretty good 3D track from that. Now it's time to create a camera, and because we shot in 48 frames per second, we got to speed everything up to 24. We can speed up the camera track by selecting all the keyframes and alt-dragging them to the middle, so we have 2 per frame. To speed up the rotoscope footage, we're going to pre-compose it all and add time warp. We're going to set the speed to 200, making sure to enable motion blur, set to manual 180 degrees, and about 16 shutter samples works well for this shot. The next step is to block out our 3D scene. We can parent our 3D camera to a null object set to move quickly through our environment. And we can block in some shapes as foreground, midground, and background items that'll be flying by, and also something for the Skytrain roof that Kevin will be standing on, and we'll make sure to parent that to the movement null so it moves with our camera. Also important now, to open up our composition settings, you can hit Command K and crank up the motion blur samples so it's all nice and smooth and we aren't getting any ghosting effects. And we can get something like this. It's not perfect, but it gives us a good idea what the movement of the final scene might feel like, and allows us to make any speed or blocking adjustments easily. But this is feeling pretty good. Okay, now to fill out our background. First, we need a clean plate of a big background image. I forgot to shoot a proper background plate for this, so I had to scrub through a bunch of the drone footage that we took, and eventually found this quick pan, which will be good enough to stitch together a rough panorama. I make a large composition just 1 frame long and pull a few frames into it. I stitch them together roughly and do a few content-aware fills to fill out the edges. And that gives us this. Okay, now for the trees. During a different shooting day, we took some pictures of trees against a blue sky, so I can take all those and throw them into their own composition. I have 6 images, so I'm going to make the composition 6 frames long and make each image only 1 frame long. This will help me easily art direct the shot later on. I key and mask out those tree images, and they're all ready to go in the scene. I also never got a good plate of the Skytrain roof, so this random angled shot turned out to be the best I had to work with. I use an effect called CC Power Pin and line it up, then click Unstretch. I add a bit of a mesh warp to straighten some lines out, and that gives us this. It's pretty rough, but it's only visible in a few frames with lots of motion blur, so I think this will work fine for us. Okay, now that we have our elements, we can build out our scene. We can make sure everything is 3D enabled, and our background can be scaled way up and put very far back in Z-space, so we're not getting too much parallax. And I'm going to add a bit of an exposure adjustment just to make it fit better. Our trees are going to be added in 3 sections, just like how we blocked it out. And we can choose which tree image we want in each location by using time remapping hold keyframes to pick between different stills. That way, if something isn't looking right, it's easy just to change the frame and get a different image. I give all the trees a tint effect, which is just meant to blend it a little more with the background, and I adjust the intensity just based on how far the trees are from the camera. I add the train under Kevin's feet, and I also put a cassette player back where it was in our original footage. I add an adjustment layer in 3D space with some masks and an exposure effect just to add some shadows below Kevin's feet. It's not great either, but like I said, this is only on for a few frames. And now I'm going to add camera lens blur for all our layers. Things in the far background can get more camera lens blur and slightly less up front. We're mostly just going to have to eyeball it, but this feels pretty good. And the final step is to turn on motion blur for all our layers. Because this shot has so much movement, this is going to do quite a lot. And we're done. We can render it out, put it back in the timeline, and send it off for coloring. And in the end, we get this.